Hi friends, welcome to Drop-Ins to Dr. Awesome. I am Dr. Awesome, and we're going to talk a little bit about some things that are going to make shooting video for you easier as we move forward. Now, we're not going to talk about anything camera specific necessarily, but these are just some ideas that you need to think about as you begin your video career. That being said, let's get to it. So the first thing I want to talk about are some things that you want to do before you start actually shooting. Big thing I want to talk about first is format your card. Formatting your card allows for more storage space, and it also prevents data corruption. A lot of times if you're moving from camera to camera with the same card without formatting, what will happen is your data gets corrupted, your footage doesn't save the way it's supposed to, and you wind up wasting a whole day of work for footage you can't use. I don't ever want to see that happen to you. Format your card. Just remember that before you format it, to save anything you want to keep somewhere else, because once it's formatted, that stuff is gone forever. Set your white balance. White balance is what tells the camera how to define colors. Don't trust auto. Take a white card, point your camera at it, and set the white balance. Your life is just going to be so much better if you do. Set your shutter speed. Shutter speed is one of the primary ways that you control how much light is coming into your camera. The slower your shutter speed, the more light is coming in. The faster your shutter speed, the less light is coming in. Naturally, if you're outdoors, you want less light coming in. If you're indoors, you want more light coming in. Just remember that if your shutter speed is too fast, what will happen is you won't ever be able to get the correct exposure. It'll always look dark, it may be a little grainy, it just won't look the way it's supposed to. And if your shutter speed is too slow or too open, what will happen is you may get the exposure where you want it, but you'll start to see motion blurs and things like that, and it's not what you want. So always make sure and set this. I like to start inside at 1/40th or 1/45th of a second. Outside, I like to start at 1/100th or 1/110th of a second, and just kind of adjust from there. Those aren't rules, they're just go-to starting points for me. Set your iris. Once you've got your shutter speed set, your iris is how you fine-tune your exposure. Now, if you're using a DSLR, this is also referred to as your f-stop, and it's a little more of a hard click function rather than a fluid turn, but it serves the same purpose. If you are using a DSLR, I need to caution you, the more open your f-stop is, the more light is coming in. You're also adjusting your depth of field. The more open it is, the more shallow that depth of field becomes, and so it becomes harder to get full wide shots in focus. This is a really great tool when you're shooting interviews and you want just somebody's face to be in focus, but it's something you need to consider as you move out into the field and start using your camera for other things. Set your gain. Both standard video cameras and DSLRs have a gain function. It's actually called gain on most handheld video cameras or studio cameras. It's called ISO when you're talking about DSLRs, but it does the same thing. It's just a digital lighting enhancement that makes your camera more sensitive to the light around it. I need to caution you with this. It is a digital enhancement, which means that not only is it letting more light into your camera, but it's also letting in more garbage and things like that. So upping your gain or ISO to get more light in can be something that you do if you're trying to get something in a low light situation, but you need to remember that as you do that, you're also going to get more grain and more digital distortion as well. Again, nothing wrong with it, just consider it and make sure you're planning ahead when you go out to shoot. Set your ND filter. Your ND filter is basically sunglasses for your camera. It's a filter that goes in front of the lens that blocks light from coming in. Unlike your gain or ISO, this is not a digital enhancement. This is actually a physical thing that happens to the camera. So you don't wind up with the distortion or grain that you would get if your ISO or gain was set incorrectly. But if you're using it like inside when you don't need to be using it, a lot of times it becomes very difficult to get the exposure you're looking for. Last thing I want to talk about before I move on is don't forget to focus your camera. I know it seems simple, and that's why it's not on the actual list here, but always remember, focus your camera. Don't trust autofocus. Autofocus is not your friend. Okay? Cool. So the next thing I want to talk about are 4 of the basic kinds of shots that we use, especially when we're talking about shooting with talent, people. I'm going to open with a wide shot, or establishing shot as they're sometimes called, and these are the shots that we use to really tell the audience where the action of whatever we're shooting is taking place. We typically have your talent in the middle, and what's going on around them kind of defines where they're at. Obviously, we have Denzel Washington here. He's walking down the sidewalk in the city, and something's getting ready to happen. Then we have medium shots. Medium shots are typically from the waist up, and these accentuate certain things about the talent. We use them when we're doing stuff like this nice bow shot here, and it just gives you a little more honing in on your talent without having to go all in for the close-up, which is what we're talking about next. Close-ups, or headshots, as they're sometimes called, are really pretty much just that. They're when you get right in there on the face, and that's what you're focusing on. These are typically used for interviews, things like that. And there is one more shot I want to talk about, and that is the extreme close-up. Now, extreme close-up shots are used to emphasize certain things in a given shot. So they're typically eyes or mouths or a hand or something like that, something that gives you some kind of contextual something that is different than what you've been looking at. And those are kind of my 4 basic shots that I think you need to know how to do. Along with the kinds of shots that you can get, we also need to think about composition as you're moving forward. Now, composition is basically just how a shot is set up and how you want it to look. And the first thing I want to talk about is the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is pretty simple. It's when you define your shot and you cut it into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. And you always want to have your points of interest, your talent, those need to be on intersection points or intersection lines. And so in my wide shot here, you can see that our talent, the lines hit at his shoulders and his knees. Now those lines are very important because your shoulders and your knees, when you're walking, are the points of your body's motion. And that's a really easy way to frame this shot up. We come over here to our medium shot, and you can see that the actual intersection point here is right in the middle of her forehead. The line goes down through her eye, goes down through this hand, and down through the very center of her body. Our other line over here hits with her other hand, and so this shot is just really nicely framed up. Then we come down here, and we're looking at Thor here. Again, this line comes through his forehead, and this line comes down right through one eye, and then this bottom intersection line here hits right at his mouth. And that's not a hard and fast rule for composition, but it's a really easy thing to follow to really get shots that look like you know what you're doing. Part of that is also your headroom and lead room. Now, headroom is just the area above your talent's head in a given shot, and really you define that by where this top line hits. The closer you get on a talent, the less headroom you're going to have, typically speaking. But here, honestly, for looking at this, I would say this is a little more headroom than I would normally want, because I would want to move this line down probably to her eyes. But the reason they didn't do that is because they really wanted to have this nice arc of the bow here. So you really need to consider what else is in your shot. You can't just consider what the person looks like. There's also, like I said, lead room, and lead room is the distance from your talent's face to the edge of the screen in the direction they are looking. And again, this rule of thirds really helps you define that, because as long as you have this line on their eye, that kind of defines where it needs to be. And as long as you follow that, you should be good to go. Like I said, it's not a hard rule, but it is something that if you want to look like you know what you're doing, it's a really easy thing to do to give that impression. Last thing I want to talk about before I'm willing to call this done is the 5-shot method. Now, much like the rule of thirds in composition, this is not a hard rule, but it is something that is really easy to do that makes it look like you have some kind of plan and know what you're doing. These are the 5 shots you need to give that impression no matter what you're shooting. You need a close-up of hands. This shows your audience what is happening, what's being worked on. You need a close-up of your talent's face. This shows your audience who's doing the work. You need a wider establishing shot. This shows the audience where this work or action is taking place. You need an over-the-shoulder shot. This over-the-shoulder shot is what ties those first 3 things together. We see who's working on it. We see what they're working on. We see where it's happening at. And the last thing you need is a unique shot that is contextually tied to what your story is about. And this just gives it that nice little flair that makes it visually interesting and keeps the audience engaged. And really, that's it. Those are my my tips that you need to consider as you begin your sort of video career. And I mean, as always, the best advice I can give you is get a camera, go out, start shooting, start practicing these things. No one's going to get it right on their first try, but if you have any problems, by all means, call me, text me, email me, come to my office. I'm all about helping you out. I want you guys to get the best footage you can. And that being said, keep shooting, friends.